The Great War really was unlike anything the world had ever seen. This goes for the size of the war, the number of countries that were involved. It also had a lot to do with the way armies fought each other. That's what we're going to talk about today in Mr. E's classroom. Hey ladies and gentlemen, Mr. E here. Today we're going to talk about a new kind of warfare. Specifically, we're going to try to answer the question, how did armies fight during the Great War? So pay attention to the video and take some good notes, and hopefully by the end you'll have an answer. During the Great War, armies used a new type of warfare called trench warfare. The problem was, when they used the old style of fighting, one army lines up over here, another army lines up over here, and they just start shooting at each other. Well, that didn't really work when we introduced some things we're going to talk about here in just a second. People just died way too quickly. So they decided, hey, if we dig some trenches, one army digs a trench here, another army digs a trench here, we can still shoot back and forth, but we'll be a lot lower to the ground, so hopefully we won't get hit. The problem is, when you start to dig holes in grounds and basically try to live in there for 4 years or so, it makes for some pretty miserable conditions. Think about it. A hole in the ground is typically pretty cold. It's going to be muddy. You're going to be in a really confined space. And when you get crammed in there with a whole bunch of other people, there's going to be a lot of disease that gets passed around, including something really nasty that we'll talk about in class called trench foot. Here are a few photos to show exactly what the conditions were like for soldiers during the Great War in those trenches. Does this really look like a place that you want to have to spend the better part of 4, almost 5 years? I don't know about you, but I sure as heck don't. So I talked about the trenches on either side, but in the middle between the two trenches was an area called no man's land. This area was often filled with things like barbed wire, landmines. It was the target for big cannons all the time. It really wasn't a place that you'd want to spend a whole lot of time. I mean, just take a look at these pictures right here. This isn't a place I'd want to walk across, much less have to run across while somebody else was shooting at me and big giant bombs were falling on top of me. Can you imagine how miserable it must have been to have to deal with these kind of conditions? During the Great War, the armies of Europe and eventually the United States, they got to test out a whole lot of new kind of ways of killing each other. Things like machine guns, artillery, tanks, poison gas, which is why you have to have something like this. In the ocean they had things like submarines, and for the first time we saw planes up in the sky. The Great War was the first major war where machine guns were used by both sides. Machine guns were kind of a game changer. Before they showed up, you had one man with one rifle that at best could fire between 10 and 15 bullets a minute. The machine gun shows up, and all of a sudden there's one guy with one machine gun that could spit out about 600 bullets a minute. There's really not a comparison between a rifle and a machine gun. Imagine trying to hit somebody with a pebble. If you had a regular rifle, it would be like taking one pebble at a time. If you had a machine gun, it was basically like scooping up a big giant handful and throwing them out there. The machine guns were absolutely devastating, especially when you had to cross a place like no man's land running into guys with machine guns firing at you. Artillery wasn't really a new concept during the Great War. It just got a whole lot better. Before the Great War, artillery pieces were basically just big giant cannons. During the Great War, the range that those cannons could shoot got extended significantly. You had small artillery pieces, kind of like right here in the picture. They could shoot several hundred yards easily with pretty great accuracy. I'm going to show you something here in just a second that could shoot several miles with great accuracy. Artillery caused more casualties than any other weapon during the Great War. This thing right here is called a railroad gun. Think about a battleship. Everybody knows basically what a battleship is. A big boat with huge guns that stick out of it. Well, somebody got the brilliant idea to take that huge gun, instead of putting it on a ship, they put it on a railroad car. These things were massive. They would shoot up to 14-inch diameter projectiles filled full of explosives, and they could be really accurate. Here's a little clip of one of these railguns actually firing during the Great War. Look at all the dust that gets kicked up when this thing goes off. Could you imagine being near it and what the concussion from that shot must have felt like to those soldiers close by? One way armies figured out to get across no man's land was through a new invention called the tank. Tanks were basically tracked metal boxes that could go through or over just about anything in their path. They could easily cross no man's land, and they were pretty hard to stop. All you needed was one tank to walk behind. Getting across no man's land was a cinch. Poison gas was another invention that somebody cooked up during the Great War. Basically, these were gases that could burn or blind or even kill people in just massive large numbers. And it required every soldier on both sides to carry something like this, a gas mask. It was really the only protection you had against this kind of stuff. If you didn't have your gas mask, or you couldn't get it on quick enough, or it didn't fit just right, there are some pretty bad consequences. Kind of like trench foot, this is something I'll talk about in class. I'm kind of too scared to put those pictures up on YouTube. I feel like it might offend somebody. They're nasty. Here's another clip from World War I showing an artillery crew firing gas at the enemy. Notice they have to put their masks on before they can even start working, just in case. Look how widespread that cloud of gas actually gets when it finally goes off. If you weren't ready, that could kill you in an instant. Here's the reality of trench warfare and these new technologies that came about during the Great War. Ultimately, they just led to a big stalemate. Neither side could really get much of an advantage because they were so well dug in. It caused the war to just drag on for years and years. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, what do we need to take away from this video? Well, number one is trench warfare. Really, it's just a new way to do the same old thing. You line two armies up, they start shooting at each other until only one side is left. Number two, the Great War really was a time to test out all sorts of new military toys. And number three, trench warfare really just leads to a stalemate, and all that did was drag the Great War on for years longer than it probably should have. Hopefully you got some good notes and are going to be ready for our quiz when it happens in class. And as always, until next time, guys, remember, don't stop learning.